Catalytic converter thefts. This is Senate Bill number 2545. I'm going to link it down in the description. This is going to be going over a law that's already in place, but the changes to it to try to stop some of the catalytic converter thefts. I don't care who you are, where you live, somebody you know, or something in the area where there's going to be catalytic converter thefts. Hopefully this will help prevent it, stop it some way or another. It's 26 pages long. As I go over it, I will use the line number of the part that I'm going to be discussing. That way, if you do want to go back and read it, you'll know exactly where I'm talking about inside of the Senate bill. This is like my fourth time to try to make this video. I've been having some technical difficulties and the videos have been erasing themselves. So hopefully this one goes through. The first 31 lines is just the title of the Senate bill. This is going to be going over 97, 17, 71 and the changes that's going along and affecting it. The first few pages it's going to be going over definitions. Starting at 53, dealer-to-dealer transaction means any transaction of regulated metals regardless of compensation between registered scrap metal dealers. There's a reason why they're changing all these definitions and adding extra words. Line 86, purchase transaction means a transaction in which metal property is acquired whether the person acquiring the metal property gets consideration for the metal property or not. For purposes of this act, the words purchase and purchased mean a purchase transaction. That's simply just saying that if metal property goes from one person to the next, that is considered a purchase transaction, whether money is actually being exchanged. 91. Purchaser means a person who acquires metal property, whether the person gives consideration for the metal property or not. Registered business entity means a business entity created by a statute, registered and in good standing with its states and a corporation or formation, and having a federal employee identification number, which is the EIN number you get from the IRS. It's normally set up the same way as a social security number. That's your number given so you can pay your taxes and taxes on employees, and so they can pretty much keep track of you, just like a social security number. This term does not include any sole proprietorship, fictitious business name, or non-statutory general partnership. Then 102, scrap metal means any metal property that is acquired by a scrap metal dealer in a purchase transaction. 104, scrap metal dealer means any person who is engaged from a fixed location or otherwise acquiring by purchase transaction metal property that has served its original economic purpose, whether or not the person is engaged in the business of performing or the manufacturing process by which metals are converted into raw materials. That purchase transaction doesn't necessarily mean that money has to be exchanged hands, but as long as the metal property does. 110. Any person who falls under this definition must register as a scrap metal dealer pursuant to this act and its rules. 119. If a person other than the seller delivers the metal property to the purchaser shall enter the name, address, and age of the person who delivers the metal property as obtained from the personal identification card of the person delivering the metal property. If the person delivering the metal property is the employee of the scrap metal dealer acting in his official capacity and at the direction of the scrap metal dealer, the purchaser is not required to enter the name, address, and age of the person who delivers the metal property. At 128, if the seller is a registered business entity and a person other than the seller delivers the metal property to the purchaser, in addition to the information required by this paragraph A, the purchaser shall enter the name, the principal business address, name of the corporation, the state of the corporation or formation of the entity, the federal employee identification number of the entity, and the name and telephone number of a contact person for the seller. Pretty much what you're doing is collecting evidence for the police. Like I said, as we go further, this will make sense. Need to make sure this information is accurate as possible so it don't fall back on you. All right, 138. The weight, quantity, or volume and a general physical description of the type of metal property. At 142. The amount of consideration given in a purchase transaction for the metal property. If no consideration is given, a record of the origin of the regulated metal. 149, a signed statement from the person receiving consideration in the purchase transaction stating that he or she is the rightful owner of the metal property or is entitled to sell the metal property being sold. Signed statements as required by this section may be collected and recorded on paper by photographic copy or other alternative formats as set forth in the rule by the Secretary of State. Start at 167. Such records shall be maintained by the scrap metal dealer or purchaser for not less than 2 years from the date of the purchase transaction, and such records shall be made available to any law enforcement officer or Secretary of State examiner during usual and customary business hours. That goes back to collecting your evidence and protecting yourself from any type of wrongdoing. 172. The purchaser shall photographically capture the metal property as it exists when it is acquired by the purchaser. It means before you touch it, get photographic proof of what you're buying from that person. 183. During the usual and customary business hours of a scrap metal dealer, law enforcement officer, Secretary of State Examiner, after proper identification as a law enforcement officer, state or Secretary of State Examiner, shall have the right to inspect all purchased metal property and all records pertaining to the purchase of regulated metals in the possession of the scrap metal dealer or purchaser. So this cuts out any type of court proceedings. If you're going to do business as a dealer or seller or purchasers of any type of regulated metals, you're going to have to show it upon request. So between there and 242, there's a bunch of information in there about how law enforcement officers can get the metal back for the rightful owner. So if you are into the scrap metal dealer, I would suggest you click the link below and actually read over this entire Senate bill. Starting at 242, for dealer-to-dealer transaction, records required to be kept include name and address of selling dealer, date and place of each acquisition of the metal product, the weight, quantity, or volume, and a general description of the type of metal property, and the amount or type of consideration given for the metal property for the purchase dealer. Such records shall be maintained by the scrap metal dealer for not less than 2 years from the date from the purchase transaction, and such records shall be made available to any law enforcement officer or Secretary of State Examiner during usual and customary business hours. 262. A scrap metal dealer or the purchaser shall not enter into any cash transaction, and payment for the purchase of metal property. Payment shall be made by check issued to the seller or the metal property, or by electronic funds transfer. Cash transactions and sales are hard to track. This is all based on the evidence purchased. 266. If a person acquiring metal property fails to maintain the records or to hold such materials as requested by law enforcement officer under this act, such failure shall be evidence that the person receiving the metal property received it and knowing it to be stolen in violation of section 97-1770. Line 325. It shall be unlawful for a person to sell or any scrap metal dealer to purchase any copper telecommunication wire in any form or any metal property clearly identified as belonging to a telecommunications company, unless that metal property is purchased from an electrician or contractor to whom either a license has been issued by the municipality or county in this state, or a current certificate of responsibility has been issued by the State Board of Public Contractors, or a person who holds a demolition permit issued by a municipality or county in this state. Shall be unlawful for a person to sell or scrap metal dealer to purchase copper telecommunication wire that has been burned to remove the insulation, unless the seller provides certification on a form as issued by the Secretary of State and signed by a firefighter who is currently in compliance with the certification requirements of the Mississippi Fire Personnel Minimum Standard and a certification board, or a certified law enforcement officer that the source of the copper telecommunication wire was from a building destroyed in fire. Line 398. This act shall take precedence over any and all local ordinances governing purchase transaction of metal property. If any municipality or county ordinance, rule, or regulation conflicts with this provision of this act, the provisions of this act shall preempt the municipality or the county ordinance, rule, or regulations. This section shall be fully applicable to the requirements for the purchase and sale of detached catalytic converters provided in section 97-1771-3 Mississippi Code of 1972. Line 408 to 528 is just going over fraud and deception, how you're going to go to court, how you're going to file, how you're going to get your money back, and all the proceedings of that way. What's misdemeanor felony in this case? That's more towards people who buying the purchaser, not the seller. On line 528 to 571 is pretty much the same laws, but it's going to go over air conditioner parts and evaporator coils. This is an issue. People who are remodeling, have abandoned property, or building new homes, something they do is they'll steal the air conditioner units and the A coils and the outside units. They'll take the copper and the coils and stuff out of those, and they'll scrap them. That's going over a law with that, and it's pretty much the same requirements we went over before. You have to be licensed and so on and so forth to be able to scrap it and get money for it, and everything has to be documented. 572 on, this is where it's going to start going over your catalytic converters, 97-1771-3. Line 574. It is unlawful for any person to purchase or otherwise acquire a used detached catalytic converter or any other non-ferrous part thereof, unless all the following apply. Purchaser is registered as a scrap metal dealer under the section 97-1771, which is what we just went over. The sale, transfer, purchase, acquisition acquires at the fixed business address of a scrap metal dealer that is a party of the transaction. For purposes of subsection, the fixed business address of the scrap metal dealer is the address of the business that is registered pursuant to section 97-1771. Alright, can't buy any part of a catalytic converter unless it's at the place that is on your business license or where you have filed with the IRS. They must maintain all the information that was listed above. The catalytic converter or non-ferrous part thereof was purchased in a dealer-to-dealer transaction or from any of the following bona fide entities: a new or used motor vehicle dealer, an automotive repair service, a motor vehicle manufacturer, a vehicle demolisher or distributor of catalytic converters. The seller of the catalytic converter or non-ferrous part thereof provides the purchaser with all of the following information from the motor vehicle from which the catalytic converter was taken: the name of the person who removed the catalytic converter, the name of the person for whom the removal was completed, the make and model of the vehicle from which the catalytic converter was removed, the vehicle identification number of the vehicle from which the catalytic converter was removed, and a copy of the driver's license and a non-driver identification card of the seller of the catalytic converter. At line 621, this is where it's going to get really clever in the law on how to stop it. Each catalytic converter that is purchased, possessed, obtained, transported, or otherwise acquired in violation of this section is a separate violation of this section. Means if you do not fit the criteria as listed above to have this in your possession, or purchase it, or obtained it, or transport it, each catalytic converter is a violation of this section. So if you have 5, that's 5 different violations. This is where it's going to start getting a lot of people in trouble. A person who violates this section is guilty of a misdemeanor or a felony for a subsequent violation as specifically prescribed under section 97-1771. So 1 is a misdemeanor. When it goes up to 2 and so forth, that's when it becomes a felony. Now that you've made it through this whole thing, right now it's still a toss up in the air of whether they're going to vote it in or not. If they do vote it in, it will go in effect July the 1st, 2022. Being that a lot of our elections are coming up next year, I think this year what I really want to do is compile a list of bills that were presented by different political parties. Like I said, I don't want this channel to be necessarily political, but I also want you to understand who you're voting for and what they are trying to pass. And once you vote somebody in, a lot of times you don't know what they're voting for or what they're pushing through, what bills they're writing, what laws they're trying to pass. So hopefully I can get everything done to where I can list a politician, then go through and list which bills that they're trying to get passed. That way you'll have a better understanding if you want to re-vote for that person or maybe vote for somebody different. But I just want to get their name, the titles of each bill they're trying to pass with a brief summary of what it is, and tell you whether it passed or failed. And as always, thank you for watching and have a great day.